I've seen a lot of absurd things in my life. People cutting in line at Centrelink as if it were a matter of state, neighbors who think a drill is a musical instrument, and even distant relatives appearing out of nowhere to ask for money just until the deposit clears. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the dramatic opera that unfolded in my apartment complex thanks to the supreme elite of Bogan Karens in the Strata. It all started with a simple act of rebellion. I committed the greatest sin possible in a complex governed by a committee of ladies with bleached blonde hair and inflated senses of justice. I didn't go to the community barbecue. Yes, I turned down the invitation to an event that was technically optional but, in practice, was treated like a loyalty test to the Karen monarchy. I didn't go there to eat undercooked sausages, listen to gossip disguised as small talk, and pretend I think the new cement pot with a fern from Unit 12B is amazing. And that was it. That was all it took for chaos to ensue. But before we dive into the complete frenzy that became my life, let me give you some context. The place where I live is a sort of microcosm of suburban Australia, meticulously trimmed lawns, white fences, and that suspicious silence of a neighborhood where everyone pretends to love each other while watching you from behind the curtain. The Strata is run by a trio of ladies with too much time on their hands and a thirst for power, who treat the rules of the complex like they are clauses of the Constitution. The leader of the group, whom we shall call Supreme Karen, is the type of woman who walks into the Strata meeting with a blue folder full of laminated papers and a pink highlighter. She has an almost spiritual passion for regulations and constantly repeats phrases like, according to Clause 3, Section 8, Paragraph 2. The woman is a blend of retired bureaucrat and soap opera villain, and she's not alone. There's a legion of lesser Karens orbiting her universe, each with their role. There's the plant Karen, who judges your garden with her eyes, the parking Karen, who writes down license plates as if she were a traffic cop, and the bulletin Karen, responsible for sending printed notices about any imaginary infractions. And it was in this setting, fit for a sitcom with a bad script, that my small social refusal became a spark. If I had accepted the invitation, eaten the sausage, and said the new automatic gate is indeed a blessing, none of this would have happened. But I didn't play their game. And for that, I decided to document everything. Because what comes next? Well, it's going to make you question whether you really know your neighbors. If you think living in a complex is synonymous with peace, security, and that warm sense of community, then, my condolences. You've never known a place run by a Strata committee dominated by Karens in full supreme Bogan mode. My apartment complex, on paper, was the typical ideal slice of Australian suburbia, semi-detached houses with backyards, shared entrances, and that vibe of buy here and live in peace forever with barbecues on Sundays and bad jokes from the neighbor across the street. But in practice, it felt like I had moved straight into a blend of The Truman Show and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Right in the first month, I realized that everything here had a manual, an unofficial manual of course. The rules of the complex came with personal interpretations from the Strata, which changed according to Supreme Karen's mood. You could receive a formal warning for altering the visual aesthetics of the facade, that is, hanging a fern outside the light green palette approved in 2013. Painting the front door? Only if it was with the shade non-existent gray number 6, authorized by unanimous vote. Surveillance was constant. There were days I'd wake up and feel that chill down my spine, not from fear, but from the certainty that someone was watching me from the second-floor window, hidden behind a beige curtain with a shell pattern. The parking Karen, for example, knew all the plates in the block. She walked around with a little notebook jotting down entry and exit times, almost as if she were compiling a dossier on my routine. The plant Karen, she was obsessed with symmetry. One day she rang my doorbell with a measuring tape in hand just to say that my lavender pot was 2 centimeters out of alignment with the standard balcony layout. I laughed. She did not. She took a photo, sent it to the Strata group, and hours later I received an email with the subject, irregular alignment of decorative elements. Up to that point, I was trying to keep it diplomatic. I replied with a, thanks for the heads up, I'll adjust it soon, thinking I'd win over the community. Poor deluded me. With each attempt to be cordial, they responded with more rigidity. It was like a game of territorial domination. I'd trim the garden, they'd question the type of fertilizer. I'd install a clothesline, and I'd receive a notice for unauthorized visual impact. At one point, even my dog started walking along the footpath, afraid to step out of line, literally. The atmosphere was so tense that I began calling the complex Karenopolis. There, the local government was the Strata Committee. The parliament was the monthly meetings with chamomile tea and apple pie, and the Constitution was the Strata manual that they rewrote as it suited them. But the strangest thing was that there was a collective sense of fear disguised as civility. No one confronted the Karens directly. The other residents, mostly retirees who just wanted to mow the lawn and watch MasterChef in peace, preferred to pretend that nothing was happening. It was as if everyone lived under a cordial dictatorship. And of course, everyone knew that any sign of independence could land you on the blacklist. And then came the last straw, the infamous Strata barbecue. The annual ceremony where every resident was invited, big quotation marks here, to attend, smile, eat, compliment, thank, and above all, submit to the social theater of the Supreme Karen, an event filled with dry sausage, bland potato salad, and poisoned conversation sprinkled with sugar. It was when I declined the invitation that I realized their true power. Until then, I was just another undisciplined neighbor. After that, I became the target. But hold on. Before they lit the fuse, they started with the preview, the little tortures of everyday life. And that's where the story begins to escalate from suburban drama to a full-blown conspiracy film, with gasoline, fire, and a hefty dose of irony that only Australian life can offer. It's funny how, in certain social circles, you can commit small, thoughtless misdemeanors without major consequences, like parking in the visitor's spot for 5 minutes, or forgetting to put the lid down on the recycling bin. But if there's one thing you cannot do in a body corporate managed by Bogan Karens in dictatorship mode, it's miss the annual Strata barbecue. I knew that. I knew it very well. That letter arrived in advance, printed on pastel yellow paper with bold letters that looked more like passive-aggressive screams. Cordially invited to the annual community meeting. Attendance expected from all residents. The word expected was the trap. Because if you read quickly, it seems like an invitation. But in reality, it was a summons in the form of a threat. At the bottom of the letter, written in Comic Sans, was the final warning. Please confirm your attendance by the 10th. Absence without justification may compromise the harmony of the community. Translating to Karenese, don't go and prepare for hell. And me? I committed the sacrilege. I didn't go. I didn't even give an elaborate excuse. I just ignored the invitation and went about my life. I took that Sunday to wash the tractor in the yard, my personal renovation project, which was already a cause for sideways glances, listen to some 80s rock, and above all, not force myself to smile while eating bread with dry sausage and listening to gossip about the love life of the couple from Unit 7C. But the next day, the atmosphere changed. The Karens didn't say anything directly. They don't work that way. They are experts in indirect attacks, as if they were masters of social martial arts. Early in the morning, when I went out to put the rubbish out, I noticed the neighbors were looking away. The parking Karen, who always made a point of greeting me with a cold, forced, "Good morning," simply walked past. At the entrance of the building, the notice board had a new printed notice. Thank you to everyone who participated and contributed to another event of unity and respect. The absence of some was felt by all. We hope for more commitment next time. Signed, of course, Community Committee. It was the equivalent of being excommunicated. Overnight, I became the villain of the 6 o'clock drama. During the week, what were once small, cold interactions turned into a psychological war. A package of mine was lost and mysteriously reappeared days later, soaked with water. I started hearing whispers when I passed by the parking lot. Even the plant Karen, who previously only talked about organic fertilizer, began to ignore my good morning. On Friday, I found a folded piece of paper at my door. No signature, of course. It simply said, "If you don't want to participate in the community, maybe this isn't the best place for you." That wasn't just a jab. It was a warning, an alert, that I was officially on the Strata radar. And what comes after the radar? Well, I still didn't know they were about to escalate from the psychological to the literal. But like any good story that starts with a burnt sausage and ends in flames, that week was just heating up. By this point, I had already understood that my absence from the barbecue wasn't just a personal choice, it had been, in their minds, an act of betrayal. And in a community run by Bogan Karens, with a homemade sense of justice, betrayal is punished with method and creativity. The hostilities began subtly. One day I noticed my rubbish bags were being taken before the truck passed. I thought it was a coincidence, maybe some animal had torn them, until I saw on the security camera at the entrance a figure in gray tracksuit and floral slippers, unmistakably the Bulletin Karen, carrying my bags and throwing them into one of the bins on the side street. When I went to ask, she made the classic innocent face. "Oh dear, I thought it was out of standard. Rubbish placed before the regulated time." The audacity was bigger than her bun. The following week, the disappearance of my mail began. Letters, bills, small packages. Nothing that immediately drew attention, but enough to make me look irresponsible with my accounts. I called the post office, complained, talked to the postman, who told me, with that dragged-out Brisbane accent, "Man, your mailbox is like a tourist spot. Every week there's an old lady looking in there." Then came the episode of the notification for noise from elevated footsteps. Yes, you read that right. I was formally warned for walking too heavily in the common corridor. The letter stated that the noise of my heels going down the stairs affected the auditory well-being of the unit below. Notably, I lived on the ground floor. It was at that point I realized they weren't just irritated. They had declared war. The escalation was gradual, like a siege campaign. One day, someone sprayed disinfectant on my plants. The next, the lock on my gate was replaced with another, by mistake, and at one point, they started leaving real estate flyers at my door, as if subtly suggesting I should sell and leave. The message was clear. You no longer belong to this sanctuary of controlled madness. But that's when things moved beyond the psychological realm. It was a Tuesday night. Winter was starting to tighten its grip, that dry chill typical of August. I was watching TV with the fireplace on when I heard a dry explosion, followed by a flash coming from the backyard. The kind of sound that makes your stomach drop before you even understand what happened. I ran outside and saw a scene that still seems like it was taken from a movie. My tractor was on fire. Yes, the tractor. It wasn't one of those modern tractors with a closed cabin and air conditioning. It was an old model that I had bought for a symbolic price from a retired farmer. A personal project, almost a hobby, that I was restoring bit by bit. It was parked in my backyard, covered by a blue tarp, or at least it was, until that night. The flames were reaching high, illuminating the walls of my house and creating dancing shadows on the condominium walls. I immediately called the fire brigade and ran with the hose, trying to contain the fire. That's when I noticed the tarp had been torn before it caught fire. And the smell? It was fuel, strong, artificial. As the firefighters arrived, I noticed silhouettes in the neighbors' windows, static figures behind the curtain. And then, like a scene from a theater of hypocrisy, the Supreme Karen appeared on her balcony, in a beige bathrobe, holding a cup of tea. She looked at the scene as if watching a distant bonfire, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Wow, what a danger! I wonder if it was accidental." Soon the others arrived. Plant Karen, in slippers and a sleep cap. Parking Karen, with her inseparable notebook. And of course Bulletin Karen, with a phone in hand, already taking photos. For the record, of course. The firefighters arrived and efficiently controlled the fire. Meanwhile, I observed the circus set up in my own home. It was surreal. The same committee that had been pursuing me was now pretending to be concerned, planting narratives at the moment of crisis. One of the firefighters pulled me aside and asked, "Any idea who might want to do this?" I replied with a cynical smile, "I have some suspicions. They all live in Block B." And there, on that cold night illuminated by the flames of an old tractor, I realized the fight was no longer just about appearances, social etiquette, or rules of conduct. No, those women were playing to win. They just forgot one detail. The game was about to turn. After the fire, the condominium plunged into a heavy silence. But it wasn't the silence of mourning or shock. It was a calculated silence, tense, almost ceremonial. The Karens had made their move, and now they were waiting for a response, or at the very least, my social surrender. But there was a problem with their expectation. I wasn't just the tractor guy. The day after the fire, I went back to work, which in my case means putting on the uniform of a regional volunteer firefighter and taking my shift at the local station. Yes, firefighter. Volunteer, it's true, but with 12 years of experience, a complete fire investigation course, and more firefighting stories than those women have motivational quotes framed on their walls. And of course, I had never told them any of this. Why? Because, until then, I never thought it was necessary. I liked the anonymity, keeping my condominium life separate from real life. After all, if you reveal that kind of thing to a Karen, she quickly turns your work into unpaid community service. But now it was different. The next morning, I was called for the debriefing meeting on the case. A residential fire, even in a private area, requires a formal investigation, and as a longtime volunteer and sector commander, I was assigned to assist in analyzing what had happened. In other words, I would officially be part of the team investigating the fire of my own tractor. The irony was so delicious it made me want to laugh out loud. But I held back. It wasn't time yet. 2 days later, already in uniform, helmet under my arm, I returned to the condominium for a technical inspection with the team. I got out of the vehicle with the serious posture of someone who knows what they're doing, just in time to see 3 Karens materializing on the balcony, like hens pecking for corn on hot asphalt. The Supreme Karen, of course, came to meet me. Generic brand gym clothes, tight ponytail, and that blue folder full of useless papers under her arm. She opened the most artificial smile in the world. "Oh, hello. What are you doing here in that uniform?" I smiled. It was the first time in weeks that I felt pleasure looking into her eyes. "I'm the chief of the volunteer brigade in the area. I'm here to assist in the investigation of the fire you witnessed so closely." She froze. Not literally, unfortunately, but the smile faded like expired whipped cream. The other Karens, who were a few meters away, instinctively stepped back, as if they had been caught meddling where they shouldn't, and, let's be honest, that was pretty much what happened. I went through the technical details with the team, measuring residues, collecting soil samples, checking the origin of the flames, everything meticulously documented. But what amused me the most was the collateral spectacle. The Karens trying to understand at what moment the tractor neighbor turned into authority with a badge and clipboard. In the following days, their behavior changed like magic. Plant Karen brought me homemade muffins. Parking Karen thanked me for serving the community. And Bulletin Karen handed me an envelope with a handwritten letter saying, "We hope you recover well. We're all rooting for justice." The attempt to reverse the narrative was pathetic and absolutely predictable. But my favorite part was the forced normalization attempt. The Supreme Karen called for a new Strata meeting, an informal coffee for collective alignment. I was personally invited, with a pat on the back and everything. The same man who, weeks earlier, had been treated as a threat to social balance was now seen as a key player in good relations. I went, of course. I arrived in full uniform and looked each of them in the eye, a light smile on my face. During the coffee, someone commented, "It's so good to have someone with your experience here. Safety is everything, right?" And I, without missing a beat, "Especially when the danger comes from within." Silent, dry sips of tea, glances to the side, and I seized the moment. That brief instant of collective awareness that the game had changed. The war was not over yet, but now at least they knew I was not an easy target. And more importantly, I was no longer alone on this board. The best part of this whole story, and there were many good parts, was witnessing the beginning of the silent deconstruction of the Karen empire. Because, you see, one thing is to bully from a distance with an innocent face. Another, quite different, is when it becomes a police matter, technical expertise, and the risk of legal action. The investigation into the fire officially began a week after the incident. I, for obvious reasons of direct involvement, could not lead the process, but I was part of the initial collection and kept informed of the progress. And what appeared right away? Traces of accelerant in the soil. More specifically, traces of petrol around the base of the tractor, and footprints that did not match the shoes I was wearing. That was when the team requested access to the security cameras of nearby houses. And guess what? All the cameras that had previously been a point of pride for the Strata community's security were mysteriously turned off that night. That's right. 0 images, 0 records. But the irony, the only camera that captured something was that of a neighbor from Block C, a newcomer who had not yet been properly converted by the Karen cult. His camera, pointed at the side entrance of the building, recorded a figure passing by at 11:42 p.m., wearing a beige bathrobe and carrying something bulky. The resolution was low, but the hair shape was unmistakable. When the image landed in the hands of the forensics team, the atmosphere in the condominium changed. The Karens became strangely silent. No more notes, no more flyers. The Karen's plants were dying because apparently she no longer went out to water them. And then, as always happens with great empires, there came the internal betrayal. The husband of the supreme Karen, the poor guy Ken Submissive, was seen talking to one of the investigators in front of the building. At first, nothing too unusual, but soon after he disappeared for 2 days. When he reappeared, his demeanor was that of a liberated man. He passed by me, smiling and waving with a certain relief. He even commented, in a confiding tone, "We always knew she was a bit intense, but I never imagined things would get to this point." In other words, he spilled the beans. He didn't directly confirm, of course, but he left clues. He talked about his wife's obsession with the tractor, about the anger after the barbecue, about comments she had made in the week of the fire. Comments like, "This old hunk of junk ruins all the harmony of the garden. One day it'll disappear." You couldn't indict her just with that. But the puzzle was coming together. Motive, opportunity, behavior pattern, and a witness who, even without admitting it, made everything very clear. Meanwhile, the neighborhood, once complicit in silence, began to distance itself. No one wanted to be associated with a potential crime. The Karens were isolated, like dethroned queens in forced exile. And it didn't matter how many chamomile teas or emergency meetings they held. The damage was done. The most curious thing was the desperate attempt to maintain an intact public image. The Supreme Karen walked around the building in gym clothes and a pasted-on smile, as if nothing was happening. But it was all a facade. Inside, she already knew. She had lost control of the narrative. The investigation ultimately concluded that the fire was arson, with the use of an accelerant and human action. But due to a lack of clear images and formal testimony, no one was indicted. The forensics team did its part, and I, as part of the brigade and the community, was informed of the development. There was no full justice, but there was something even more effective: social exposure. The Karens now had a history, an uncomfortable past, and worse, an entire neighborhood looking askance at them. The empire fell, and even without handcuffs, the fall was felt. Because, in the world of the Karens, there is no greater punishment than losing moral authority. By this point, the condominium had transformed into a post-war scene. The balconies, once buzzing with the gossiping energy of the Karens, were now empty. The plant lady's plants died of thirst and pride. The parking Karen stopped doing her rounds with the little notebook. And the bulletin Karen, well, she hadn't printed anything in days, which, coming from her, is basically a clinical sign of collapse. But don't think they disappeared. Karens never vanish. They strategically retreat to preserve their reputation, like a snake shedding its skin. And while the world around them changed, I was planning my revenge. Nothing illegal, of course. I would never stoop to their level. My revenge would be poetic, silent, and above all, visible. I started with the reconstruction of my tractor. Yes, the very one they tried to destroy with fire and petrol. I salvaged what I could: the chassis, some internal parts, the original steering wheel, and took it to a friend of mine who works with rural vehicle restoration in Queensland. I brought photos, ideas, references, and a special request. I want it to come back stronger, more eye-catching, and with a clear message. 2 months later, the tractor was back, painted in vibrant red, with golden details, new tires, and a customized stripe on the bonnet in bold letters that read, "Anti-Karen Tractor, indestructible since 2023. I installed LED lights on the wheels and a horn that plays an instrumental snippet of Highway to Hell. Over the top? Undoubtedly, but absolutely necessary. I parked the beast right in the backyard, facing the Karen's porch, and I left the tarp off. They saw the tractor every day, and they knew it survived. They did not. The neighborhood, which had previously avoided me for fear of retaliation from the Karen clan, now greeted me with shy waves and knowing glances. An older gentleman from Block D even brought me a beer as a congratulations on the project. A new resident said she thought the name of the tractor was funny, and when I explained, she laughed for 3 straight minutes. The legend had already spread. And the Karens? Well, they maintained the theater, but it was a different kind of performance. That forced smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The attempt to engage the community with new events, which no one else attended. The Supreme Karen even proposed a community reconciliation journey, but the WhatsApp group was solemnly ignored by everyone. Their social humiliation was my justice. I didn't need to lift a finger. I just let their own arrogance dig the hole. And if you think it ended there, let me tell you, my final move was symbolic. I put up a decorative sign in front of my house, made of recycled wood with hand-carved letters. Here lives a good neighbor, but don't try to test. Days later, someone ripped the sign down, but I was already expecting it. I replaced it with another, this time made of metal, bolted straight into the concrete. More resilient, more permanent, just like my patience with authoritarian neighbors. In the end, the Karens weren't arrested. None admitted guilt, but they lost something that, for them, was far more valuable: control, image, social dominance, and me. I continue to live peacefully. My new tractor shines in the afternoon sun. The plants have grown back again, and the sound of hurried footsteps on the stairs has been replaced by the sweetest of silence, that of the Karens trying to pretend nothing happened. But every time someone new moves in and asks why that tractor has such a peculiar name, I tell the story. With gusto, with details, and with the certainty that, somewhere out there, there's another Karen squinting her eyes in anger, unable to do absolutely anything about it.